Hi and welcome to another episode of Making Things. Today I'll be syncing some Christmas lights with music using a Raspberry Pi. This is all off-the-shelf stuff. LightShowPi is the main thing we're going to be using. It already exists, it's well documented. I guess the reason I'm putting this together is to really break it down to the very basics. Whenever something is completely new to someone, oftentimes the existing instructions are going to be missing little things and you have to go get them in different spots, like what is SSH, how to open it, what's the default username, password and all that. It's all well documented, but if you're looking for how to sync the lights, you first have to figure out how to set up your Raspberry Pi, how to just do everything from scratch, so I'm just trying to put it all together. So for this project you're going to need just a couple things. Raspberry Pi. I'm going with a Pi Zero W just because they're so tiny, dirt cheap. They come with pretty much everything you need except the header pins because the Wi-Fi is integrated, and I paid $14 US, so they go for Canadian, so they go for $10 US. It's just super affordable. But the downside is you need to solder either the headers on your own, or just solder the wires directly in. When we're going to be connecting them to the relays. And the other thing you're going to need is an 8-channel relay board. You can get those generally the same place you're buying the Raspberry Pi from. If that's Amazon, well, you got to make sure you're getting one for the Pi. But if you're getting it from a store like Buy a Pi in Canada or Adafruit in the States, they'll have all of this stuff. What you want is a 5-volt relay board. It has extra stuff to protect the Pi and so on. You'll need a mini HDMI to regular HDMI, not micro HDMI. So there's an even smaller one than this. You do not want that. You want this mini one. And finally, an OTG cable. So that's I'm not sure what OTG stands for, but what it'll allow you to do is convert this micro USB port to a regular USB port, to which you're going to be able to plug a keyboard and mouse when you're setting up initially. Now, obviously, if you don't want to be switching back and forth between the mouse and keyboard, you're going to need a USB hub as well, but you're actually going to need the mouse so little that you could probably just get away with unplugging it, plugging it back in till you're done. Other than that, a couple standard items are going to be the micro SD card. I'd recommend minimum 4 gigs. Anything bigger doesn't really matter. You're going to need some female to female header pins. So I accidentally got female to male, so I've just been cutting them and making my own. For the audio output, if you're using any of the other models than the Pi Zero, you're going to be able to just plug in through a regular audio jack. With the Pi Zero, you're going to have to use, I've got one on order, I don't have it yet, but it's a HDMI audio extractor, what they call it. So it's essentially you just plug through the HDMI port, and instead of outputting to a single port, it'll split it up so you can access the audio directly. There is Bluetooth on here, but the Bluetooth is kind of finicky. I got it working with certain applications like VLC and such, but I haven't gotten it working at a system level. So I given up on the Bluetooth audio for this project specifically. And then there's also options of going through the GPIO pins, but we're already going to be using a lot of these. It's a finickier option, so I'd say use a bigger board that has the audio output, or a USB to audio, or a HDMI sound extractor. That doesn't really matter how you decide to go about it, but just pick one that works for you. And finally, you will need a USB power supply. I think everyone's got those nowadays. You'll find people saying you need a 2-amp one, whatever. A half an amp has been enough to run my Pi so far. It's just that if you go under power and you're starting to draw a bit too much, you'll get weird issues and you won't know why. So just go with a stronger one if you can, and save yourself the headaches. So this is the board I made. It's a bit more complicated than it needs to be, just because I wanted everything to be powered from a single 12-volt power supply. So I've got a step-down buck converter that's to get the 5 volts for the Pi / then the relays through the GPIOs, because you can power a Raspberry Pi through the GPIO pins. All you need to do is connect your positive to one of the two 5-volt power, and then your negative to any of the grounds. And back with the older models, there were some potential concerns with a fuse that had a fairly limited amount of current that could go through it. But on the Pi Zeros that was actually removed, there's no polyfuse, so the risk is only that of plugging in power in any which way in the Pi. So if you feel comfortable doing it, go for it. And then these step up to 24 volts, just because 2 of my LED strings are 24 volts, obviously. The rest is all 12 volts. So you don't need to make it look like this. I wanted it on a single board I can carry around and put away for this summer. But the big thing I wanted to explain here is just how you set up your wiring for the relay. So the astute amongst you will notice that this is not an actual wiring diagram. It's just a little schematic. Just to explain how this works. So if you've got your power going in, so in this case I have my 12 volt power supply here, but it could be whatever. If you're using line voltage for your Christmas lights, which I wouldn't recommend playing with it, but if that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. Not my place to tell you what to do. You're going to have one going to your lights, and then the other one gets interrupted by the relay. So the relay acts like a switch, and it's just because the reason I just want to show this is because this does look like a hodgepodge of wires, because it is. So what happens is this is just a split in the wiring. So if you pretend that the relay doesn't do anything, what happens is the only opening is here. The power brick, this thing is technically, it's connected together here. So my positive and my negative are connected through here. So the LEDs are going to go each on one end of these connections. Obviously you can just put the wires directly in here. I personally find it easier if I can move things around. And so what happens when you have 8 of them, so if you have your 8 channels, we'll just do 3 for the demonstration. So the drawing here, it's kind of hidden, but what you get is this little doodle, and you have 2 of the screw holes are on this square, one of them is on this one with the little triangle. This is a symbol for a switch. So you're going to want to have one on this side and then one on the side of the square. So I'm just going to draw 2 on these. I'll ignore the third one because we're not using it. Now, if everything is running off the same amount of power, in this case, I sent a wire from the positive railing to each one of these relays, but I really didn't need to do that. If you connect the power between each one of these, and then this goes to the battery pack, to the power supply, it comes out to the exact same thing as if you had the power supply and then you had one going out here, one going out here, and then one going out here. So you'll notice that if you trace it back down, you can connect these together. So that's what could happen here. So you end up with essentially pretty much an infinite amount of setups you can do. That's why I'm not going to spend too much time focusing on how I did the electronics, even though that's usually what I do more of. My Instructables post will be more on the detailed hardware side of things, but there's just so many options out there, and whatever you do, even though technically these can all be connected, if it's easier for you in your mind to be able to see where the wire goes and so on, which was the case for me, I find that it's easier if I can just take my finger and follow it to make sure that I've got everything right before I plug it in, and just break my stuff if I did it wrong. That's what you get, right? So there's nothing wrong with taking the extra little steps, even though it's technically less efficient. I mean, this is recycled wiring. Like, what do I care?
The first thing
right?
we need to get done is installing noobs. So that's what's going to let us get Raspbian on our Pi really easily. It's really just a matter of downloading the file and copy pasting it to the micro SD card we're going to be using. So for this, you're going to need the micro SD card for your Pi, but also a card reader, just so you can copy the files on it easily. So just make sure you format your card first, and then just copy paste the contents of the zip file you just downloaded over, and that should be it. Next step is going to be to plug the Pi in and get ready. But right before I do that, I'm going to do the GPIO pins right away, just because that way if I screw up, well, I won't have installed Pi for nothing. So this is probably the crappiest soldering job you're ever going to see. It's below freezing here, and I'm just essentially doing some really half-baked reflowing here, trying to get it to work. So it's miserable soldering, really.
Alright, so I just plugged it in. I've got this absolutely terrible USB hub that you should never buy. Unfortunately, I don't have a good way to capture the feed from the Pi. So I actually really like Raspbian, so I'm just going to go straight with that. Whoa, cool. I haven't used this in quite a while. The last time I did this, I did not have noobs. It was a couple of years ago. I mean, I'm sure it was still around, but man, that little app is awesome. I need to get more of those Pi Zeros.
Alright, so I set up VNC just so I could get a proper capture. You might want to do that. Turning on VNC and SSH is going to be really helpful, but it's not necessary at the beginning because you have your monitor. But obviously, if you want to be able to not have to plug it in, then that's the way to go. So I'm just going to show you how to get VNC. So the difference between VNC and SSH is going to open just the command window like this, and VNC is going to give you the whole viewer interface. So the first thing you're going to do is open one of these command windows. As you can see, it's not that quick, and that's kind of the downside of having a weak machine like a Pi with a graphical user interface like this. So that's where the SSH really comes in helpful. So I think first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the password. I don't actually want a real password on this. There you go. So the first step whenever you set up a Raspberry Pi, first thing to do is to update everything. Oh, and by the way, the default password was Raspberry, and the default username is Pi. So, I mean, it's documented everywhere, but so you don't need to hunt for it. All right. Next thing to do is to upgrade. So, if you just press the up arrow, you get the last command, and we'll change it for upgrade instead of update. And for those of you who don't know, sudo, that's essentially sending a root command, so an admin command if you're in Windows. Essentially, when you get that little pop-up that says, are you sure, blah blah blah, need administrative privileges, or whatever the boxes say nowadays. I never read them. It's the same idea. The program I use to SSH is the Bitvice SSH client. The reason I like it is also opens an FTP, an SFTP graphical interface window at the same time.
So it's just an all-in-one. It's not the fastest. You'll get better responsiveness if you're using specialized software for one or for the other, but it doesn't really matter much for what we're doing. The only time it ever actually caused slowdowns was when I had to access, dozens of machines one after another. But even then, I still preferred using it just because it was a two-in-one step, and then I could move the files easily, go on to the next part. And yes, commands could have done that, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's a level of simplicity with just clicking around for a file. So to get that VNC app installed, I'm going to assume you want it. It's sudo apt-get install real VNC-server. And we're also going to install the viewer, real VNC-viewer. So I already had it installed on there. I hope it doesn't break anything that I'm using it as I'm... There you go. Yeah, so it's just going to ignore it because I already had it. That's good. And then you're going to go to the little Raspberry menu, Preferences, Raspberry Pi Configuration. Interfaces, and you're just going to enable SSH and VNC, and we're going to right away enable remote GPIO because we might be using it yet, I'm not sure. Probably not, because we'll have a little software running here, but that's something I actually kind of use with the Pi, so just enable it right away. And now we're ready to just be using SSH or VNC. So I'm going to go back to SSH now just because it's less laggy. I had a bit of trouble with some of my screen caps, so I'm going to have to start over for a couple things. If you want to use VNC or SSH, you're going to need the IP address on your Pi first. So you're just going to enter the command ifconfig, ifconfig, and that's going to give you your IP information, your network information actually. So the one we want is iNet, and mine is 192.168.1.122. So that's it. And when you're connecting, so as I said, I'd recommend Bitvice SSH. You put in the IP address. The port is going to be the default one. It's 22. So the username is Pi, and the password is whatever you've changed it to. If you haven't changed it, the default is Raspberry. And then to access it, all you do is log in. By default, it's probably already going to have open the SFTP window, but if you turned it off like I did, just click on it, and then bam, all of a sudden you can transfer files really easily in and out of your Pi. I'll log out. When it comes to VNC, so I use the VNC viewer for Google Chrome. Don't use Ultra VNC viewer. It's got issues for some reason. Don't know why, but apparently it doesn't play very nice with the Pi. So it's going to be the same thing, 192.168.1.122, except that the port here is going to be selected by putting a colon, and then the port is going to be 5900, so that's the default port for VNC. And then when we connect, it's going to ask us for the username, again, Pi, and then the password, whatever you've set it to. And there you go. So to set up LightShowPi, that's actually going to take a little while, but you do go to if you just go to the LightShowPi website, just go to lightshowpi.org, getting started, and you'll get the instructions. It's mostly just copy pasting the commands into the Bitvice SSH, so it's pretty easy. The way you copy paste is once you've copied it from the browser, you just right click to paste. Anything with a little ampersands or hashtags you can just skip. They're just comments, and you can do multiple commands at once in Linux, and it seems like they've already separated it properly, so you can just do whatever is in between comments in single chunks. Yeah, I've already done this. Like I was saying, I had trouble, so can't do it again. On to the third set of commands. All I'm doing here is copy pasting, so I'm not gonna bother going through the
details. So this was the get method. At the end, the important part is going to be once you've downloaded everything, you do move over to the folder. So CD is to change the directory you're in, and one of the things you're going to see frequently if you're looking at different instructions from different places is people are going to be using the little squiggly line slash something. So squiggly line is always equivalent to slash home slash your username. So in this case it's pi. So LightShow, well actually we're going to go back up, so CD. So if I do squiggly slash CD squiggly slash LightShowPi, it'll do the exact same thing as when I did home slash LightShowPi. So that's a little thing that's important to know. Makes things quite a bit simpler. And when you are going to be sending commands, you always need to already be in the folder for the LightShowPi. So that's something that's going to come in later on. So once we've done that, we're going to run the install.sh. I'm not going to do that again because it takes about 3 hours. So once it's started, you just walk away. One of the issues you might run into, though, if you're using SSH and your computer goes to sleep, it'll close the terminal. When it closes the terminal, it'll actually stop what it's doing. So you may want to launch this from within VNC if you're not sure how stable your connection is going to remain. If your computer doesn't go to sleep, you know it's going to be fine. You just use SSH. It's going to be faster, smoother. So it's really a balance of things here. And once you're done, you're just going to reboot it. So that's going to be sudo reboot. And it'll disconnect you, and you're going to be able to reconnect once it's done booting back up.
Alright, so this is the beauty of these little Raspberry Pis. All that's left now is just the power input, which would actually be really easy to have as a battery. So this is where printing out one of these gets really handy. Just Google for the pinout GPIO pins for the Raspberry Pi, and it'll give you that. On the 0, the one is in the top left corner next to the micro SD card, and the last pin, the 40th, is down at the bottom right next to that little hole. And another indicator is these 4 little extra pins that we're not using right now. Alright, so ground, we'll have to go to ground, which is pin 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it'll be the third down. Just count by 2, it'll do it. For 5 volts, it'll be the one right before it. So the voltage is the last one. So we're just going to put it right next to the ground. And then these pins are all in order, but these pins are all a little bit messed up. So pin 1 is going to be, actually we're going to start with pin 0. It's going to be 11, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down, and so on. So they're going to be all over the place. One of them's getting powered, so that's not right. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, we can see it. There you go. So it's being powered. That is blue. Which is pin 6. Where did I put 6? 11th down. Let's see if that's what I did. Just power this off first. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so I was able to figure out the issue. My pin 5, which I kept calling 6 because we started at 0, whatever. It was shorted with the ground. I noticed there's a tiny little speck of solder, and I just literally just scratched it off and that was it. So all right, I'm back. So actually something I took for granted was the fact that I should have mentioned this. So the GPIO numbering system, there's actually more than one of them. The person who created the program Wiring Pi, which is actually being used by the Pi LightShow program there, whatever it's called. And so the numbering, like if you look at this other chart, 6th is on 31st, whereas here 6th is on 22nd. But just to double check everything, 22nd is a GPIO, even in the alternative, it's GPIO 25, so it's not like there's a mistake here or anything, regardless of what the numbering is. So essentially what happens is I have all of these connected to the positive, negative of this little battery. These are just dinky little LEDs. I don't have my protection circuit on there, but essentially the negative power is interrupted by the relays, and the relays are controlled by the pins. So just to test it one more time now. So CD, you want to go to LightShowPi, and then sudo Python fingers crossed. Success. All right.